I'm Hanson Hosein, Director of the Master of Communication and Digital Media. Welcome to Media Space. Our show seeks out the collision points between society and technology. It also explores the four peaks of our region: innovation, entrepreneurship, entertainment, and community. We talk to creative thinkers on the hot-button issues of our digital age. Together, we'll find out how these entrepreneurial leaders are changing our lives right now and what's next. In this episode, Jessica Rothenberg-Aalami believes the world's poorest people can use communication technologies to meet some of their basic needs. And why not? It's said that 80% of our planet's population lives within range of a cell phone tower. Not only that, Jessica says the innovations from those developing markets can actually be imported back here into the developed world. Jessica heads up the Gobee Group. She's also the co-author of the new book, Technology at the Margins: How IT Meets the Needs of Emerging Markets. We'll explore what it takes to do business with the bottom of the pyramid, and how disruptive is this to existing business models there and here. We'll also bring you into our discussion. Use the Twitter hashtag FOUR, F-O-U-R, PEAKS, P-E-A-K-S, and we'll track your questions. Jessica, welcome.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
So over the last few years, we've had some pretty important philosophies come out. The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid, which was a book that came out about 7 years ago, talking about doing business with the poorest people in the world. And now we have your book, Technology at the Margins. We've seemed to be moving away from this notion of charity for these emerging countries to something that says we can do business with them, that there's profit to be made there, and while we're making this profit, we can actually serve their needs. How has this happened? What's going on?
Actually, I think we don't necessarily say that you'll make money immediately. What we're saying is there's a long process of learning about our biases in this space of technology innovation, learning how to work with partners in order to co-develop some of the technologies that will make change and also address some of the world's most pressing problems. And ultimately, we're hopeful that this, I would say, going between the sites of need and some of our greatest innovation, we can come together and hopefully create profitable and, I would say, meaningful technology.
So I hear the measure in your response, which is great, but I'm just curious, how did this shift even happen? How did we go away from charity to this even thought that profit could be the motivating factor here?
I think, well, actually, I'll step back, and I would say 2000, the United Nations brought many different groups together in pursuit of the Millennium Development Goals, that we need to work together in order to face some of the most critical challenges in the world, whether it's poverty, hunger, gender inequality, lack of access to universal education.
AIDS,
exactly.
HIV, yeah.
And to do so, we need to partner. And that's definitely easier said than done.
And this notion, and even I'm looking at this is something you might have been involved with, this notion of using interactive web-based data visualization and decision support application to improve the cost effectiveness of HIV treatment programs. We're looking at this really from a business point of view now. It's amazing.
Yeah, and this is also for, let's say, these countries. They need the meaningful data in order to get the drug choices they need. And that lack of access to meaningful data in the past is something we hope we remedy with things like emerging market solutions and those that focus on the needs of the majority of the world and not the minority of the world. And we've focused for the last 20 years on, I would say, customers in a little over 30 countries who live on about $40,000 US a year.
So that's the middle of the economic period, or the top.
That's actually the very top. 1 billion people we've focused on. And now we have to look at the needs of the majority of the world. That's over 5.7 billion people.
Who make a lot less money.
Who are on average $3,000 US a year.
And then even at the total bottom, we're looking at $2 or $3 a day, right?
Over half of those make
So what you talk about in your book and in the work that you do with the Gobee Group is using technology to service some of these needs. And when we think about these countries and these people, we're thinking about clean water. But you're going further and saying, hey, technology can also be something here. What's your premise to that?
Yeah, I'll just state for the record that that I'm not a technopolist or technologist or technology utopianist in any way, shape, or form. But there is absolutely a role technology can play when it's affordable, accessible. And we come at that, at least at the Gobee Group and those I've researched with at various universities, we come at that because without using technology, we're not able to expand access to essential services. There will never be enough doctors. We have to face that fact. We will never have enough teachers. We will never have enough banks. We will never have enough farms who can provide some of the essential needs and provide essential needs.
So not enough human capacity to provide the needs that these people
And technology
require.
just simply brings more connection points to the table. It allows us to provide some of the, I would say, exclusive and hard to reach information from world-class universities can be housed, information can be gathered over a mobile phone, and that rural worker can use that information to their use, as long as we have intermediaries. And that's another part in the book that we get at, that these trusted intermediaries help us moderate and translate some of this information.
And these intermediate, I mean, even the
Gobee.
Gobee.
Yeah.
What does Gobee stand for? It sounds like something in between, right?
No, it's a
small marine fish that typically has a sucker on its underside.
Absolutely.
What is Gobee?
Gobee came up because we're always going between. My partners and I, we all have had, for better or worse, long careers in research and field research, in development, and the role technology may play in advancing some, I said, better practices and development. We also wanted to work at ending some of the failed development work. So in order to better understand where we've had challenges and where these failures were happening, we go between. We go between the research centers where major technology innovation is happening. We go to the field constantly to see where a pilot has been rolled out, or work in partnership with local researchers. We have to work with intermediaries like the United Nations and World Bank, who fund a lot of these efforts. And we also have to work with major multinationals because they have the budgets to really innovate technology in this space.
What's an example of of what you do out there in the field? I noticed you've done some work on in elections in Africa, for example.
Right.
What would be an example of applying your process and technology to that particular issue?
I think Vote for Africa, again, is a social media tool where we can do crowdsourcing and we can get people to, I guess, provide feedback at polling sites.
Using what kind, like cell phones?
Yeah, SMS.
Okay. Okay.
We can do SMS,
Text messaging. So you're not talking about having really powerful laptops or iPads there?
Oh, no. We're talking about the majority of the world, and the majority of the world has access to a mobile phone. And as you mentioned earlier, 90% in range of a cellular network. And low-cost SMSing is a very powerful communication tool. And that gets amplified through other internet-based social media tools, like we've seen Al Jazeera and in the case of Tunisia and Egypt. But there are all these other experiments that we're trying. We don't see them yet on the shelf, but will hopefully increase more and more access to, again, healthcare, education, financial services, and other areas.
What I found most intriguing, one of the chapters I enjoyed the most in the book, was this notion of harnessing disruption, that because of this shortage, of this lack of capacity at a human level and the technology that you can bring in to address some of those issues, things are being turned upside down. The people you normally relied on, whether they're experts, institutions, business models, are either going away or not as important as they used to be. Do you celebrate disruption in this situation?
Oh, absolutely. I think if we're trying to look at furthering, let's say, poverty alleviation, we have to start at and many people have said this, start with the need, start with the problem, work together to define solutions, and see, in that case, if an information communication technology tool would help us to solve some of these problems. So disruption is, over the last, I would say, 10 years of this movement towards providing technology to emerging market, everybody has had to re-examine their bias, their perspective across the board, whether you're a researcher in an academic institution, whether you're a field researcher, whether you're comfortably situated in a major multinational in one of the major technology hubs. Everybody has had to step back and I would say be a little humble, because clearly we haven't seen great growth in market share. Nokia as an exception, obviously has about 35% of the mobile handheld market, and most of that is in so-called developing economies.
Soon to be Microsoft, because they've just adopted that operating system.
There you have it. So we do see some successes, but we see some limitations, and hopefully in the book you'll see where we see some real potential.
And that disruption that's coming is that these technologies actually do things in a far more cost-effective way in many ways than what the traditional business models do. We're seeing that disruption even here, obviously. This is what's disrupted the publishing industry, journalism, the music industry. Is there a chance that the disruption that's happening there and the technologies that are being applied in those emerging markets, the solutions there can actually bring both innovation and disruption back here as well?
Oh, definitely. I think we provide some examples, especially in healthcare. We talk a little bit about reverse innovation. General Electric, along with Harvard Business Review, are talking a little bit about the role of companies when they're moving their innovation labs and developing for those economies in particular. Again, that's the over 140 countries that major multinational companies hadn't been developing technology for. That they are creating solutions in the case of, let's say, diagnostic equipment or ultrasound. In China, sold basic PC-based ultrasound, sold in China, brought back here is selling for $15,000 US dollars.
Which is considerably cheaper than the hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars for diagnostic imaging here. So that's a huge disruption.
Yeah. And we take it further. What does that look like on a $50 phone?
Wow.
So we're going to see more of that, but it's uncomfortable because they call it cannibalization. You're eating at your existing product lines when you're bringing back this lower cost, more flexible and affordable technology.
I know the book discusses several technologies, but what I'm most intrigued by is the ubiquity of mobile phones in these markets. That even where running, basic clean running water is a challenge, everybody seems to have a cell phone. Why is telecommunications seen as such a basic need in these places where they make so little money? It's surprising to see them having more sophisticated handsets than we even have out here.
Definitely. I think we all love to gossip.
Is that what it is? Just the need to have that connection?
Connection, communication. And fundamentally, it's a lower cost if you can text, and it's charged incrementally. A lot of the reasons why we don't see PCs in the household, broadband access is not available in a majority of these countries. We're just now hitting about 2 billion with access to the internet in the world. Well, if you've got over 6 billion people, a lot of people simply don't have access. But the cell phone does provide a communication tool, and with the basic functionality you can communicate. But even those which are more, with the applications, et cetera, and more purchasing, I think more people find it's the tool of choice.
And we've got frogtech up here. What's interesting to me is that whenever we talk about the ubiquity of cell phones among poor populations, even here in North America, it's always going to be text messaging because data is just too expensive, right? You can't actually access the internet because it's going to cost you a fortune. We know that when we travel to other countries using our iPhone, it's going to cost a lot of money. But is it only text messaging? I mean, this particular company has actually come up with a data solution for shopkeepers, I believe, in South America. What are we looking at then? Are we moving beyond the text message as the primary solution in mobile to something else?
Higher functionality, absolutely. Not necessarily a smartphone, although in cases you'll see definitely penetration of those phones as well for, let's say, upper income or folks willing to spend more of their income in these countries on those tools. But we do see smarter phones.
So, so we are going to see more data. So, for example, what does frogtech do? I mean, they basically, it's like an inventory system for shopkeepers in developing countries?
Well, I think actually frogtech, along with many other, are using the mobile cell phone as an all-inclusive tool for micro-entrepreneurs, small businesses, who can do multiple accounting. They can take care of also point of sale.
And this is all used to be done by sort of paper and carbon and ledgers and whatever else. And why is this so important? Why does this help development in these parts of the world?
Why? That's a great question.
Is it just because it makes sort of business more efficient and allows for more business to happen?
I think that's the argument. I think the jury's out. We're still seeing that, again, the majority of folks who are using these experiments have told us that the functionality, the efficiency, better tracking of information, and ultimately it's been a useful tool.
That's amazing. Well, I just, we have gotten so cell phone happy here in North America with the the penetration of smartphones. I was doing, as I was looking into the subject, I love this notion. Somebody said that mobile phones, wherever you may be in the world, it provides a fixed identity point in a tumultuous world. And maybe this is why it's of such great appeal to people, especially in emerging markets or where people don't make that much money, where they're hard to track, where there's natural disaster or dislocation, that no matter what, even if they don't have their home, they've got their cell phone. So you must see this all the time. You probably go to these countries and you're just amazed by the people who do have these things in their hands when they have so little else.
I don't know if I'm that amazed. I think I think that may be coming from a perspective where technology is ever present in your life, but tools that provide access and ability to communicate with loved ones afar, or even as a bank in many ways. We've heard quite a bit from the M-Pesa example in Kenya.
Can you explain this a little bit more?
Sure.
About that?
I believe it was a 2007 Safaricom, part of the Vodafone Group, created this idea. Well, it's actually extension off of many other experiments, but that you could actually go to a provider that's working for M-Pesa. M is for mobile, Pesa is money in Swahili. And you could essentially use that provider as a bank. You could provide money. They would provide that amount on the SIM card on your phone. You could send that text message to your family or somebody that you needed to pay that money to, whether it was a bill.
And these are people who don't even have bank accounts in regular banks, but all of a sudden they're using this technology to do that.
Because over 3 billion people in the world don't have access to a bank.
So how does this facilitate development in this situation?
Well, you bypass institutions that are very expensive, and those that run them perhaps, and the expertise required to run them. So you're bypassing in some sense and providing a direct person-to-person via the phone link and providing an essential service.
What's amazing to me is that in many ways, this is more advanced than the services we have here. I think this is the leapfrog.
That's why we're importing innovation.
It's a leapfrog effect, isn't it? They're going beyond what we've got.
Definitely.
And this is something that we could use here. Is this something we should be looking forward to having pretty soon here in Seattle?
I don't know. We seem to be a little bit distracted.
Who's slowing us down?
I think people keep using the under their mattress. I'm not sure where they're putting their money.
Well, given the situation with the banks in the last few years, don't blame them. Yeah. Well, so let's break for a moment, and when we return, will these great ideas stick? We're back with Jessica Rothenberg-Aalami. Jessica, at the end of the book, actually the last few paragraphs, you mentioned this need to strike an equilibrium between not using technology whatsoever to deal with these solutions and people who have charged, not necessarily you, but others, with techno-utopianism, this idea that technology is the magic bullet that's going to solve all problems. And Kentaro Toyama has been the one who's been most outspoken about this and had a piece recently in The Atlantic, that technology can only be a magnifier of human intent and capacity, he says. It can't be the standalone solution. So he's saying that in a village where they set up an internet center, for example, typically what happens is that if the males get control of it, they're going to be gaming, watching TV, and sometimes even sort of watching adult movies and not really using it for the intentions that it was there. It sounds to me like this is what we hoped TV would do for North America, and it went the wrong way as well. How do you address that criticism?
That's actually a great question. I think anybody working in this space who comes at it from a field perspective, watching people try out technology and use them for their needs, would assume that technology is merely one part of a very dynamic set of relationships. And I think in this case, assuming that technology is only used for good is naive. And that most of the time, if you're coming from perhaps a perspective where I'm here to help with my new technology solution rather than figuring out ways to get technology at the lowest cost, the most relevant, depending on the need, and somehow working together across this chain to get that technology on the ground. And I think that that's probably where there's a little tension there. But I think also maybe in Kentaro and other, other folks who have come to that realization over time, is traditionally because they're coming from perhaps a research lab where they are themselves computer scientists or engineers who are, I like to say, they've got a technology in search of a problem.
And what are you?
I'm coming out the other side, which is I'm in perhaps working with a revolving loan poverty alleviation project and suddenly see this introduction of a phone or an internet cafe in the middle of an attempt to bring more people into let's say sustainable farming practices. And then watching that tension when a pilot is dropped in of let's say a computer technology center or a mobile phone given to one group over another, and watching that tension on the ground of all the unintended consequences that some of these well-meaning projects have come from. So there's somewhere about meeting in the middle,
and
I would say.
Have you attempted to alleviate some of those unintended consequences? You have some strategy called, I believe, Think Tech Act, is that correct? And is that an attempt to address this?
Yeah, we were trying to turn it on its head a little bit because a lot of times we're coming in and saying as long as people have the technology skill and awareness of their technology choices, they will be able to advance the missions or their goals when it comes to working in development and technology. And I think we argue at the Gobee Group at the very least that we need to take more time to allow organizations that are working in development to define their problems as they see it, build up the repository of knowledge they need about their options in order to become decision makers in their technology choices. Then we can begin that process of, perhaps bringing a technology solution
more
to the table.
deliberation, more context before throwing technology.
Definitely,
at the
context is
solution.
everything.
Okay.
That's my bias a little bit, but I think that uneasy tension needs to push us to the next level, which I think we're at.
Well, your answers have actually inspired a lot of questions. So I'm going to go to our Twitter feed here. I've got
Should
it right
I duck?
here. So, what is the major challenge you face to turn research, which is what you do, into profitable business at the bottom of the pyramid? And what industry do you believe is really leading the way here?
I think I'll probably start with the second half.
Okay,
I think the industry that's leading the way right now, in my mind, is in healthcare. It's been clear for people to match a need with a potential solution, whether it's in diagnostic or information gathering or surveillance when it comes to sort of augmenting existing practices. We have the Aravind, let's say, Eye Care Center in India as an example, decades ago starting these centers in order to provide a cataract surgery. And the introduction of technology just allowed more rural outpost centers to exist, serving more clients with obviously the hospitals providing that important feedback mechanism. So health seems to be clearer for people, easier to understand, and probably has the greatest potential. Now research, I think the role of research, especially over the last decade, has been better understanding these markets to begin with. What do we mean by emerging market? Are we talking about which level of technologies are applicable? So I think the role of research is really in expanding our understanding of the majority of the world, which we really haven't been talking about in at least the tech sector.
It is really hard to define emerging market, isn't it? I mean, there could be emerging markets even here, right here in the United States.
Yeah.
It's such an amorphous thing.
It is an amorphous thing, and I think it's more about new markets that we haven't focused on, which is really those that are represented by low and middle income economies.
Here's a question. How important is open data to giving back to communities who contribute to technology initiatives in emerging markets? Do you understand it? It's just the idea that you're probably accumulating a lot of information here, and how much does that actually get shared? Yeah,
that would be, I hope, the focus of the next decade. Because I think so much information, quality information, is still inaccessible. And I think that there's attempts to provide access to some of this amazing research from university databases, all the way to some of the statistics and other information needed globally. I think the problem we have, though, is that we're not getting that information readily distributed or translated for use. So I say the next decade will be more translators of this information and more free access.
More translators and more transparency, obviously, for both sides.
Absolutely.
It sounds like a challenge from an infrastructure point of view, but something that's obviously a mandate for you in the work that you do.
Absolutely.
That's pretty important. Along the same lines, what legal safeties can be gained or even lost when working with a go-between in economies which is ripe with bribery. And we know that a lot of these emerging markets have a certain degree of corruption that you have to sort of see as almost part of the landscape. But how do you deal with this from a legal point of view?
The
Friendship price. You are the go-between, right?
Yeah. We are the go-between, but fortunately we're cloaked under this research. We're there to better understand the role of these technologies and potentially meeting some of the most pressing needs. So we end up having a little bit more of a collaborative partnership-based model. So we usually work with a trusted intermediary at a research center or non-governmental organization, or those that have been working on the ground for a long period of time. So it takes us a long time actually to do the work that we do.
I remember, believe reading at the beginning of your book, it's that Microsoft Research got interested in exploring this part of the world, partly out of, seems to be fear that if they didn't do this, disruptions would be coming out of there anyway, and they wouldn't be ready for it. So this is almost like an early warning system for them. So I know that you've had a relationship with Microsoft Research, as have your co-authors. Was that really part of the drive there? Is that there was that concern over disruption?
Well, as you mentioned, the fortune at the bottom of the period, at the bottom of the pyramid, that was the hype, and continues to be the hype, I think, for major technology companies, that there's increased competition. Who are the future customers? What are we going to do? We only have 1 billion folks that we've been focusing on, but the majority world is still untapped.
Is it still hype, or is it actually a legitimate trend or a legitimate thing that's going on that we have to be part of?
We are part of it, but the jury's out on whether there's money to be made. And that's where there's this tension. And who can actually deliver those technologies is still outstanding.
Well, I think that's a wonderful suspension point to leave our talk at. Thank you all for joining us. Tune in again next month online and on air for the next episode of Media Space. I'm Hanson Hosein.